ahead. Thank you. Thank you also for the time chosen for this meeting to talk about something that to talk about violations resulting from dictatorship, because they are too deep usually and we usually find out after the fall of authoritarianism, like has happened in Syria. But I can talk to you about people who have not received medical care in prison, including one of my clients, whose limbs were amputated. So this is not only concerning what happens to political prisoners, but the state violates human dignity against all prisoners. There are no rights, there is no hygiene, there are no visits by children, there is no possibility of practicing any activities that preserve human dignity. So the situation of political prisoners explains what the authorities want to achieve. Who have been targeted? It's those who used to play different roles in the political scene. So those who the regime decided to target are institutions and the possibility of continuing political life. So first he targeted the assembly and the Supreme Judicial Council to undermine the separation of powers. And then after prosecuting all members of parliament and banning them from traveling, including members of the Karama coalition, including former MP Yassine Ayari. And now judges are the target. Why? Because just as Mr. Kilani said, they would have stood against. So anyone who did not submit to orders of the executive were dismissed or imprisoned. For instance, the situation of Hattab bin Uthman, a trade unionist from the court union. He was accused of hiding a report, and when that was proven to be wrong, he was rearrested on the same day. He was released at 9 p.m. and at 4 a.m. the next day he was rearrested, and the interrogation judge who had released him found that his office had been sealed and he was dismissed from work. And the aim is to establish fear. I have seen how the judge who issued 7 prison orders against well-known political activists like Jawhar bin Mbarak, Shayma Isa, Aysam al-Shabi. I saw how that judge was crying after issuing prison orders against these opponents. He was not convinced, he was not happy, he was crying. Investigation judges at the anti-terrorism pole, after issuing those prison orders, they live in a constant state of fear and anxiety. And even after executing those orders, they are still moved to other areas, and other judges are brought to those positions to play the same role. So what has happened gradually is that those who played any role during the 10 years of freedom, as an official, as a politician, as an activist, as a member of parliament, anyone who was a hero of the anti-terror struggle, such as Judge Bashir al-Akrami, anyone who was part of the narrative of democratic success, of the establishment of a democracy in the third world and the Arab world, have become targets, because the target is the institutions and the narrative itself, the possibility of achieving a successful model That was the target. After that, just before the elections, repression increased to exclude all serious rivals. When the elections came, there was no serious competitor. Journalists, since the arrest of individuals who were not prominent opponents, but like Burhan Sayis, Murad Zridi, commentators, and when they were arrested, everyone else got the message that there is no possibility of freedom of expression. All institutions have become devoid of any role or meaning. We have now the anti-terror laws that allow the pre-trial detention period to 15 days, that is now applied to political detainees. So, which would allow the fabrication of any charges during that period. So this is what happened, for instance, against Mr. Dr. Mondarunisi. He was arrested because on social media there was a recording attributed to him discussing between him and journalist Shahrazad Akesha, discussing internal matters of a Nahda party. What is the relationship between such a recording and terrorism? There is no violence, there are no jihadi groups, there are no weapons. This is a doctor known in his medical field who is teaching medicine at university and who had a role in a legal party, and a journalist who is not known for extremism. What is the relationship between terrorism and this case, for this case to be considered an anti-terror case? He was arrested in a humiliating way by the anti-terrorism unit, and his phone was searched to find any basis for a charge. When they did not find anything, they accused him of communicating with foreign bodies. And then to expand the case, they added other activists from Ennahda inside Tunisia and outside Tunisia. And when the investigation was concluded, they considered that not given information about that journalist and those activists can be considered a refusal to report a terrorist crime, which is nonsense. But when this is repeated, it leads us to a question. So the anti-terrorism unit and system, which has left its original role and is chasing political prisoners and opponents, does it have any time to play its real role of combating terrorism? These anti-terrorism units are now devoted, based on orders by the president, to chase those who disagree with the decisions of Qais Said. This is not an exception. All cases at the anti-terrorism poll are related to political opponents. Bloggers also, who are being accused of terrorism for writing critical things related to the elections, related to the regime or Qais Said, and they had not done anything that could be described as terrorism. If you notice, anyone who led another party in the last 3 years has been arrested and tried for terrorism, although they had taken part in power, they had taken part in elections. It's a party that gave up power. Rashid Ghanouchi is being prosecuted for several cases. One of them is terrorism, based on his speech. Also, Mundar Unisi, who took over as president of the party, has also is detained for terrorism. Also, the Secretary General, who took over from Mundar Unisi after his arrest, he himself is also being accused of terrorism and imprisoned after attending a public protest of the National Salvation Front related to supporting political prisoners. And he was detained on his way in his car with another activist of another party who is being accused of not attending a summons by the interrogation judge in a case that was already concluded. So the case of Mundar Unusi was supposed to include Mohamed Ghanoudi, a member of another party. That investigation was sealed and concluded, and he did not receive the summons. Then when that member was in the same car as the former Secretary General of another party, Ajmi Lorimi, the two of them who were on their way back from a protest of the National Salvation Front, the two were arrested. So we see that whenever anyone tries to play a political role, even publicly and legally, they find themselves in prison. Anyone who stood in the elections find themselves in prison. Anyone who tries to criticize the authorities find themselves in prison. So as a result, we find the desertification of political life, and all prisons have been filled, and now we see the need to build new prisons. The restrictions we see currently against lawyers are unprecedented. We cannot visit our clients freely. We cannot be given a permit to visit more than one political prisoner at a time. If I visit Jawhar bin Barak, I cannot visit Jawhar bin Barak or Rashid Ghanouchi at the same time, although they are in the same prison. There are restrictions in all the cases of political prisoners. We were banned from attending in the first 48 hours after the detention, although that is an exception that is related only to terrorism cases. In all the cases related to political prisoners, political activists, their homes were searched, all books and documents were seized, all electronics, without any justification. We have seen children's books who were seized, things related to children or spouses, PhD theses, without any justification. Everything is seized. People were all banned from traveling without any justification. When an activist is detained, he has no rights, and the same for his family and his belongings and his bank accounts and his past, present, and future. Anything can be done. We are in a country without institutions, without a judiciary, without immunity for anyone. Recently, there was Judge Hamad al-Rahmani, who was summoned by the judge, and he pleaded judicial immunity, and now he is in prison. So we are currently, as lawyers, when we ask for the implementation of the lawyers' charter, that we should not be arrested but should be heard by the interrogation judge, which is we are arrested and we remain 48 hours at the initial judge. And this is also what happened to Nuruddin Bhiri, whose shoulder was broken at the time. So we are in a situation where there is no meaning to the penal code, no meaning to the press code, no meaning to the lawyer's charter. And you know what happened to the constitution? It was thrown away and a new constitution was written, and it's imposed on us. There is no law in Tunisia, and what is coming is worse, because political life, civil society life, trade union life, everything is over. We are in a situation where we are just waiting for God's mercy. Political prisoners who have had sentences issued, like yesterday, there was a sentence against Hattabi bin Uthman, a unionist, for his criticism of the authorities and his support for political prisoners, sentenced to 14 years, or based on an empty case file. No political prisoner has been released out of all those who were targeted in relation to roles they played during the decades of freedom, because the narrative of the coup, to justify their actions, they need to say that these were criminals. So we know this will apply to the sentences against Rashid Ghannouchi, Ali Al-Arayeb, Nuruddin Bhiri, and any officials. We expect very heavy sentences. We expect the worst against Judge Bashir Al-Akrami, because he is the judge who secured the narrative, the true narrative in relation to the terrorist cases that happened in Sousse, in Bardo, in the assassination cases. This judge has to be implicated. So we expect the worst, and we expect that the few people who are still telling the truth in relation to what is happening in Tunisia, they will be silenced. And what we can ask you as people who support freedom, not to stop talking. At one point, Tunisia will turn into a large-scale prison, and we will all be within it, most likely. And those outside prisons will not find